I said this yesterday, and boy, it's got worse. Can I say I opined yesterday on the Andrea Vance issue? The Stuff journalist from Ireland, I think, worked in the tabloid UK, has got a mouth and a mind from the sewer, who decided to use the C word that rhymes with Hunt, you know the one, at Nicola Willis, the Minister for Finance, over the pay equity issue. She called her that particular offensive name, and referred to her by her shall we say, an intimate female part of the body, or at least the rude and obscene name for it. In a article that was published by Stuff and the Sunday Star Times, who obviously are owned by Stuff, on Sunday on the issue of pay equity, in which she not only cauterised the Finance Minister, Nicola Willis, but also all of the female members of Parliament who make up the coalition government, the National, ACT, and New Zealand First Parties. Now, you'll be aware of the issue. I talked about it. I'm sure it's been a hot topic, you'd have to say, of misogyny, if you like, with women utilising misogynistic terms of other women throughout most of the social media in the last 48 hours. But so I was fascinated as a consequence of, what the reaction would be from the mainstream media to what would normally be considered a sackable offence and something that would be, you'd have drummed out of, well, frankly, not simply a place of work, but in this particular case of journalism altogether. Were you to refer to a person by utilising sexual innuendo and utilising the most obscene of pejorative and declamatory, misogynistic terms at a woman in particular, simply and for no other better reason than you disagreed with a policy decision that they made that takes nothing from nobody. Remember, it's not as if women are being stripped of any particular rights or privileges. It's not as if they're being paid less than men. It is a process that, when you simply examine it, needed quite radical overhaul and will receive it. In fact, it doesn't even get rid of pay equity, which one might argue would be the frankly sane policy decision, because it's such a nonsense and such a specious piece of reasoning and rationale that even gets you to that pay equity is even an issue, let alone that you've got to solve it. But anyhow, the government intend to streamline and to make more realistic and frankly less expensive the cost of pay equity, which was gifted to them, one would have to say, as a hospital pass by the previous government, who made, I might add, no progress on pay, or very little progress on pay equity at all, other than opening up what it meant, the comparators, and the costs for some other government to have to deal with. Well, this one's decided to do so. Anyhow, putting all that to one side, and you can have a good argument about pay equity, and it's normally a rational debate, and it's a philosophical and ideological debate as well. It's also a financial debate. Can a country afford that kind of self-indulgence, for example? And that's the way I'd characterise it, and I'd be more than happy to debate with anybody who was an advocate of pay equity on this program, or frankly, any other forum throughout New Zealand. But you see, a leading journalist, Andrea Vance, a leading political journalist and political editor, previously who'd worked at Television New Zealand, then at Fairfax, and then later on Stuff, and took on a political editorship role there. Still has that role, I might add, as a parliamentary reporter and a political journalist. Decided not to enter into a rational debate or discussion. In a column of invective and insult she decided to simply lay into all women associated with the centre-right in Parliament as being traitorous. And then, and listen, that's probably the most mild description that I could use of the column. And then, as we know, to cap it all off, decided to use the C word of Nicola Willis in particular, but of the women that supported the particular legislation last week in general. Now, and this is where I have a serious problem with the mainstream media in this country, because, well, and I was sort of thinking to myself, no, Michael, maybe you're being a little harsh in your judgments over the years. Maybe, although we know that the predominance of liberal left and particularly left journalists is a empirically researched feature of the mainstream media in this country, and although you might have regarded all mainstream media in this country for a long, long period now of sacrificing the truth for either sensation or for their political and ideological sensibilities, at the end of the day, I'm sure on this issue, which was so grievously sexist and so appallingly misogynistic in its motive and in its direction, surely the mainstream media will rise in condemnation of women being singled out for this sort of abuse, even if it should come from other women. Well, no. Silence. What you can hear and read and listen to on Andrea Vance and her C-word tirade, silence. You won't read anything. There's been one or two commentaries, one in News Talk ZB, so I'll excuse them from it. And they have got into this issue yesterday afternoon and were clearly condemnatory of the words used and the phraseology and the sheer bile that was contained in the Vance tirade. And then there was the New Zealand Herald this morning that, rather than condemn, just sought to promote those apologists for the Andrea Vance tirade. Now, the really interesting thing is that the reaction of most people, you would think, would be condemnatory. But oh no, Stuff have doubled down as of yesterday afternoon and of this morning. They have sent a response that reads, "The issue of pay equity has caused robust debate. This is not the first time our editors have allowed the use of this word. It is carefully reviewed by experienced editors, and on this occasion it was decided it was acceptable usage in this context." So there's no apology from the Stuff editorial team or from Stuff. In fact, they've doubled down on it. It was entirely appropriate and acceptable in the context of this personal and vile attack on the Minister of Finance. Okay, so what about Television New Zealand? Not a dicky bird. Not a dicky bird by any of them. What about Radio New Zealand? Nope, no stories by the state broadcaster at all. Let's walk away from this like it didn't exist. And in their world, it doesn't. And because it doesn't exist in their world, for literally hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders, it won't either, because they rely upon the state broadcasters to, in actual fact, convey, well, at least an impression of what the rest of the world's doing, if not the most accurate of representations. And then from New Zealand Herald, nothing. A report of what other people think. And then extraordinarily, they go to public relations practitioners. I kid you not, public relations practitioners for their view. And to a large extent, they say, oh, well, fair enough, you know, it's not a real problem. And then others actually, from that particular vantage, justify it by saying, well, she was really upset and it's used in vernacular, so oh, whoop-de-doo. There is no editorial view from the New Zealand Herald on this. It's just a report in pretty much the vernacular that I've given you now. And that's it. And that is it. I cannot see anybody from the centre-right, and I urge all the female members of Parliament, but also their male colleagues as well, please, do not engage or deal with Andrea Vance or stuff anymore. They have decided it's perfectly okay to insult you, and in the most vile and misogynistic of terms. They have decided that there are no limits to how they conduct their conversation with you, nor have they done anything else than demonstrate their contempt and their hatred for you by utilising the most contemptible and hated of words, or amongst them, to describe you personally and your actions generally. All I will say is this is yet another example of the mainstream media applying a sense of ethics that somehow inoculates them from A, decency, but B, the same standards that they seek to apply to others. Do you remember stuff, and this is about 3 years ago in actual fact, about this time, was sending journalists around to verbally assail and assault, I guess, in some ways, a whole variety of people who were standing for candidates who might have had some association with Voices for Freedom. Remember that? You know, the anti-vax people? Now, whatever you think of Voices for Freedom, at least they've been open and honest about what their intent is. And as a general rule, if people wanted to stand with a view that there should be, in local government at least, a different viewpoint being announced, then that would have been fine. But in actual fact, stuff went after those people and exposed them essentially as members of a cult, as nutters, as devious and deviant in actual fact. They weren't doing anything other than trying to stand for a local community board or a council of some nondescript territory somewhere. But they were vilified for entering the democratic process and having a viewpoint that was not mainstream. Now here, 3 years later, we've got one of those same journalists, the most senior, vilely attacking in the most personal and misogynistic and, frankly, inaccurate of terms, persons that she deals with in the mainstream. And her same newspaper backing her up and saying, well, it's entirely appropriate that she used that particular language in that particular context. And there will be no punishment that applies. She's done nothing wrong. So on the one hand, if I have a different point of view to stuff, I have journalists knocking on my door demanding and to explain myself. But on the other hand, if I am one of those journalists insulting in the most appalling of manners a leading politician of this country, who I disagree with on policy and now may characterize her in the most vile of ways, that's perfectly acceptable. The reason that, can I just say to stuff, to Andrea Vance in particular, the reason that people don't trust you, the reason you might get not physically, but verbally insulted on the streets is because of the way you conduct yourself. You set yourself up as some sort of moral arbiters in this country. You set yourself up as the judges of not just people and policies, but of philosophies and ideas. You set yourself up as, if you like, a cult, a holy church, of which there can only be one truth, and that's the truth that you present. And then you represent those particular views with the Andrea Vances and her particular verbiage, and you say that's fine and acceptable because it suits your political world. If you want to know why you're vilified and hated, if you want to know why no one trusts you, if you want to understand the contempt with which ordinary New Zealanders hold mainstream media journalism in particular, in general and you in particular, Look no further than your actions over the last 48 hours. You won't get it. None of this will make any difference to you. I can rage now as much as I like. It won't make any difference to you. And funny, for the way, you'll probably see it as a badge of honour. You won't care what other people think, and you'll dismiss them as being wrong or muddle-headed or stupid or not as brilliant or bright as you are. But the reality is, they're your bread and butter. They are the people who buy the products that you advertise. They are the people who read your fora. And they are turning off you in droves. When you collapse commercially in the next year or so, remember this day. And remember why you've commercially collapsed. Because everybody has walked away from you. Those are my thoughts this morning.